Michael says, how would you contrast Carmelite spirituality with other monastic orders and traditions like the Basilian, Byzantine, Benedictine?
That's a great question. I think part of the distinction with Carmelite spirituality is that we started as hermits. And I guess you could say all monastic spirituality started with the Desert Fathers and St. Anthony of the Desert. So in some ways it has its origin there. But a lot of like Benedictine spirituality, Basilian, Byzantine, or like the monks of St. Basil and things, they were always kind of living in community and had like a rich liturgical life. And that was, forged their spirituality in a lot of ways. Whereas Carmelites, because of our eremitical origins and we were hermits, there's, I think, a lot more emphasis on the personal relationship with God and the transformation that God does on the individual person. Even though we live in community shapes us, that sense of like personal union with God, I think, takes on more weight in a way and is emphasized more because of that we were hermits, and that's sort of the hermit path. Now, always it's for the sake of the church. So I don't want to give the impression that it's like only for me to be holy. Like St. Teresa has a great thing in Way of Perfection. She's like, if all of your fasts, all your prayers, all of the things you're striving for union with God are not for the sake of like the church's ministers and for, bringing all the at the time, the heretics that had left the church back in and helping, then they're for nothing, So it's always like pointed towards the church too. It's like, it's so personal and it's my union with God, but it's for the sake of the church, So maybe that's one distinction because of our eremitical origins, I could say, with Benedictine. But there's so much in common a lot because of the Desert Father tradition. I think there's a lot in common with all monastic kind of traditions.
And I've heard a Carmelite monk say that there's, your history is from the East. Y'all were born and raised in the East. So in what ways do you see similarities with maybe your spirituality with the Byzantine monks, or anything to say about that?
Yeah, exactly. I think the emphasis on the Holy Spirit is one that I think is cool that you see, especially in like St. Basil, right? Or Basil. I never know, is it Basil or Basil?
All right. I don't either. Augustine, Carnegie, I don't know.
All right, good.
I say Basil.
Basil, okay, cool. Well, same with St. Basil, the pneumatological, here's one of these little words, pneumatological focus on the Holy Spirit. You see that a lot. And the divinization that's very present in the Eastern Fathers is very present in the Carmelite tradition that you don't always see in other Western traditions as much. I think St. John of the Cross really brings that out. Like he doesn't use the word divinization, but that's transformation, becoming union with the beloved. It's the same. He calls it, we become God by participation.
Does he use the analogy with the log on fire?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a great image and it's always like relevant, I feel like, because it's so simple. It's like, so when we start opening ourselves to spiritual life, we're like, a wet log, basically, he says. And like this wet log, when the flame first enters this wet log, like it does a lot of damage in a way. Like, because the wet log seemed pretty good. Like it was probably a good color, and it was heavy and just sitting there. It was fine. It was doing what it's supposed to do. But then when the flame enters, like all of a sudden, like it starts crackling, making all this noise.
Bugs come out.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Actually, that's a good addition. I don't think John wrote that, but that's a great.
That was from Father Ken Barker. He wrote a book called, I'm going to look it up so I can tell people to go get it. He is the founder of the Companions of the Cross in Australia. I want to make sure I get this book right. I had him on the show once. He's one of my favorite people. He's such a good and beautiful man. Anyway, I'll when I think of Becoming Fire, maybe? Yeah, Becoming Fire. I would recommend this book. But he uses the analogy from John, but he talks about that. The bugs come out. So I don't want to take credit, but continue.
No, it's a great image. And and then he says it starts smelling too. It's like stinky, the smoke. It's like not good smoke. And it gets a lot like darker and blacker, the carbon, so it looks like things are going wrong. It looks like I'm going backwards and like nothing good is happening.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that's our experience so often. I feel like it's and that's that he starts there almost. It's like you feel like your prayer is hitting a wall. You're not going forward, but God is working. And it's like having that confidence that God is working. The flame has entered. And as it goes, it brings out more imperfections and more. But eventually, all those are gone in a way. At least in terms of all the things that are holding back union. Maybe you still feel imperfect, you see imperfect, but the things that are actually holding you back from union with God is purified, and the flame becomes so, it just engulfs the log so much that it becomes one.
Yeah.
There's
you
no
can't tell
difference.
where the fire and the log end and begin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, and not to say, I mean, obviously there's a difference ontologically, but you're so immersed, you're so participation, right? Is really the doctrine. The participation in the divinity is so much that you, and I haven't heard this in any other saint, Western saint at least. John says the soul becomes God by participation.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like, whoa, that's a huge.
Yeah, beautiful. I had this analogy. I think the Lord kind of taught me. I've shared it on the show before. Stop me if you've heard of it. But I was living in Ireland, and we had this very cold winter back in 2006 or 7 or 8. I forget when. 8 or I don't know. And so there was a thick blanket of snow in the backyard, and I'd look out, and it was very beautiful, just very clean and crisp and neat. And as spring started to arrive, the snow began to melt, and I started to notice that there were things under the surface. So the first thing I saw was like the handle of a tricycle that was laying sideways. I'm like, oh, there's a bloody tricycle out there. And then there's a soccer ball over there, you know, there's a carton of cigarettes maybe, or, you know, by the time the snow had melted, it was filthy, and it was not at all like I had hoped. And I think something like that, as you come into a relationship with God, and I'm kind of stealing from Lewis here a bit, but it's like, you're like, I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah.
I am doing pretty well. Got a couple of things. Sure. Who doesn't? But then the closer you come into union with him, you're like, I am a disaster zone.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the good news too. It's like, it helps us see like, I'm never going to attain this place that I think I'm doing okay. Like I'm good. I'm good, you know? And because if we're shooting for that, then it's just like, no, it's okay.
Yes. Almost like we're saying, I want to get to a point where I no longer need God.
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.